Good morning. My name is Elisa Laurel, Program Manager for the Western Riverside Council of Governments, otherwise known as WRCOG. And so thank you so much for joining us for the second episode of our Future Forward series. And for those of you that are new to WRCOG, who we are, what we do, we serve as a regional agency that focuses on helping many of our member jurisdictions within the Western Riverside County subregion through a number of innovative programs in the areas of transportation, planning, environment, energy, and conservation, just to name a few. And we're honored to continue serving you through this COVID-19 climate by serving as a resource, and especially through platforms such as our Future Forward series, which is a monthly virtual broadcast dedicated to innovating through disruptive times. We hope to feature meaningful information and thought leadership that can help in this ever-evolving climate. So before we jump into our presentation, I want to thank our in-kind sponsors for helping to support our series. A huge shout out and thank you to the Inland Empire Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Southern California Association of Governments. We appreciate your guys' support. Now, a few housekeeping rules before we jump into the presentation itself. I want to let you guys know of the app that we have going on for the moderated question portion. So we're going to have our presentation first, and then we're going to go into Q&A moderation. And if you want to submit any questions throughout, you're going to go ahead and take your phone and scan the QR code that appears in the corner of the screen. Now, if your QR code isn't working or your scanner is not working in your phone, go ahead and visit slido.com. That's spelled SLIDO.com. And then you're going to be prompted to enter an event code. And that event code is forward2, again, forward2, spelled FORWARD and the number 2. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our special guest for today, Ashley Labosier, and she is a public engagement expert. She's going to be focusing on the how COVID-19 has impacted the landscape for many of our day-to-day activities. Of course, the landscape of public engagement is not exempt from that impact, and if anything, has been more so impacted than many other industries. So today we're joined by Ashley Labosier, the Executive Director of the Davenport Institute of Engagement and Civic Leadership at the Pepperdine School of Public Policy. She's a national speaker on public engagement and transparency issues and co-designed the Institute's certification in advanced public engagement for local government. So Ashley, we're so excited to have you here today. Turning it over to you.
Thank you, Elise, for that introduction. And thanks to those of you tuning in for joining us today. The Davenport Institute has been a longtime friend of WRCOG, and I'm honored to be part of this series. So the COVID-19 pandemic has radically changed the daily operation of local governments across the country. And much of our attention right now, of course, is focused on local public health department guidelines, on the variety of shelter-in-place orders, the economic impacts, as we heard in this broadcast last month, decisions related to what exactly constitutes an essential activity, and how do we prioritize less essential activities with ongoing concerns about community spread as we move toward reopening? What's the impact of this crisis going to be on local government budgets and our future ability to provide services? In the midst of all of this, especially as we start moving toward reopening and we have all those practical considerations of installing plexiglass, rearranging office space, planning cleaning schedules, this may seem like a strange moment to be talking about public engagement. But what's happening right now to the relationship between local governments and residents, and what that means for the future of that relationship, is itself a fundamental challenge and one that's intrinsically connected to all of our other issues. The mission of the Davenport Institute is to help build stronger communities in California by promoting inclusive, authentic, and impactful public participation in local governance. That commitment to genuine public participation as a foundation for strong communities is just as vital for all of us now as it has ever been. So I want to start with this first slide by talking about why we're talking about this right now. What are some of the challenges we're facing? It's important to note that these aren't really new challenges. They're challenges that have been amplified by this crisis, but they're challenges that we've been seeing growing over the past decade. Challenges that our traditional forms of decision-making, our traditional methods of public access have been exacerbating. they're challenges that require us to get public engagement right if we're going to make any headway against them. So the first you'll see here is increasing polarization. And again, this is something that we're all familiar with. We've been talking about it for at least the last 5 years, longer than that. And I think there was a little moment at the beginning of this crisis where we all really hoped that we were pulling together and it looked like there might be a moment of unity. But as we're starting to wrestle with the real trade-offs between reopening and maintaining distance, we're starting to see those divisions, of those polarized political divisions reopening. And we need to figure out a way to reach across those divides and put those voices in contact, not just with us, we're hearing from everyone, but how do we get people to talk to each other? A second challenge, and of course this is also an opportunity, and we'll talk about that more later, but I've listed here technology as a challenge um, because technology has fundamentally changed the way that we interact with each other and the way we interact with information. As individuals, we're used to having access to information easily and quickly. We also face the challenge of not necessarily being able to sort through which information is most valid, but we certainly have expectations for access. We also have expectations based on technology for how our feedback will be used. So we can think of things like the gig economy, the whole way that Uber or Airbnb work, for instance, but even platforms like Yelp, are based on a sense that we provide feedback and that informs other people's decisions. It informs the way that businesses do business. And so we're used to having this kind of responsiveness. And we've seen, working with local governments, that government has generally not been as responsive in these areas. That this is an area where over the past 5 or 10 years, government has been lagging a bit, and it's been really hard to match our ability to respond with people's expectations. Another challenge when it comes to technology in this moment in particular is that this COVID-19 crisis has really reopened the digital divide. 4 months ago, when I would talk to local governments about their tech platforms, about how they were engaging with the public online, I would have said the key is to make sure that everything is mobile friendly, because to a large extent, mobile technology had bridged that divide. There was the vast majority of residents across all socioeconomic levels had access to some sort of smart technology. But what we're seeing right now is that although they may have the tablet or they may have the phone, they may not have the data plan or the minutes. They may have been relying on public Wi-Fi services, either in businesses or libraries or schools. And so how people are able to access the internet is becoming much more of a concern in this moment. And then finally, I've listed here wicked problems, which is a tech phrase, but really refers to problems that involve either super complex information or seemingly contradictory information, challenges that require cross-sector collaboration. So we think of problems like homelessness, of course, but also in Southern California, the development of middle-class housing. There's a lot of parties that need to be at the table. Disaster preparedness and response. Unfortunately, wildfires are not going to magically stop this year because COVID-19 has given us enough to deal with for 2020. We still need to be ready to respond to our natural emergencies. We can think of issues like mental health, education, workforce, job development. Again, none of these are new problems, but they are problems that are amplified during this time of crisis. Significantly, they've never been problems that government could solve alone. They're challenges, all of these are challenges that require collaboration across sectors. They require a type of less formal community knowledge as well, knowledge that residents can bring to the table. And not just our organized interest groups of residents, but also those voices that have often been marginalized or left out of the conversation. In order to come up with real solutions, real policy solutions, we need those to match the culture and the stories of the communities that they're intended to serve. They're challenges that require creative solutions and community ownership over those solutions. And that need for ownership and collaboration is going to be even more true as local governments face major budget cuts over the next years. As with any crisis, our challenges are also accompanied by opportunities. And I see two major opportunities in this COVID-19 crisis. Opportunities that would be tragic for us to miss in the midst of our efforts at triage. The first of these is a really renewed hunger for community. There's been a lot of literature over the past decade about our increased isolation as individuals, and that goes across the country. But we're really seeing in this moment, there's nothing like being forced to stay home for a while to make you really appreciate those connections, those in-person connections. And I've been really encouraged by what I've seen, creative solutions, creative ways of connecting, coming from both community members and governments. So here in our own neighborhood, my husband and I went for a walk the other day, and a neighbor had set up a socially distanced rest stop. About 15 feet apart, there were two big chairs where they were just inviting neighbors to stop and sit and talk to each other. I think that's really creative. We've seen governments taking the lead on these things too, organizing national nights of eating in to support local businesses, where they post all the restaurants that are open for takeout and delivery, and then encourage people to use hashtags or to host watch parties or different things. And I think that we need to really be willing to lean in and embrace and build those connections to our local community in this time. How do we create a sense of place even when we can't physically be in the same space? And a second opportunity, which is one that caught me a little bit off guard because it's a dramatic shift in trends, is trust in government. And I have my question mark here, both because, again, it came as a surprise to me, but also because I think that this trust is a little bit tenuous. It's something that we are going to need to steward. So for those of you who may not be familiar with it, this next slide is showing the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a quarterly report based on an extensive survey of public trust across a variety of institutions. So 2 weeks ago, they released their spring update, which had some, for me, very surprising findings. Between January and May, trust in government jumped 15 points. In fact, the May update found that government was the most trusted institution across the board, which is a complete trend reversal from all of the data that I've been seeing over the past decade. And we can speculate about why this is. My guess would be that it has something to do with just the sheer proliferation of contradictory information right now, and the fact that government is at least compiling information and trying to present it. Regardless of where that comes from, though, it definitely means that residents are looking to you in a way that they haven't for a very long time. And this becomes even more interesting on the next slide when we look at changes in trust along party lines in the US at this time. So you can see here that trust in federal government still breaks along party lines, going back to some of that polarization that I mentioned earlier. It's probably not surprising that under a Republican administration, Democrats have lost some faith in the federal government and Republicans have gained some confidence in the federal government. But take a look at these numbers on trust in local government. The percentage change is exactly the same for both parties. It's up 11 points since January for both Republicans and Democrats, which puts us in the realm of a supermajority trust in local government for both parties. For those of you who work in local government, this should be encouraging, but it should also be a little bit sobering. It should be sobering because trust itself is a significant responsibility. And that responsibility comes because trust assumes action. A few years ago, a colleague made an observation that really changed my own framework for trust, noting that in our polarizing world, we often confuse in our language mistrust with disagreement. So we say, I don't trust some particular person or group of people, when what we really mean is I disagree with that person or group. So when he would encounter people who said, I don't trust X, Y, or Z, he started asking them the question, what is it that you don't trust them to do? Or what is it that you don't trust them not to do? And I think that this is important for us in this moment to realize that that works on the flip side as well. So we in local government will squander this moment of trust if we conflate trust with agreement of our policy decisions. We need to recognize that there should continue to be diverse opinions about what needs to be done. That's going to get even harder as we move toward reopening and even harder as we start dealing with long-term budget fallouts. So trust doesn't equal agreement. We need to be aware of that, and we need to be okay with that. We will also, however, squander trust if we assume that it means only that the public believes the information we're saying. So on this next slide, on the right side of the slide, I guess the left-hand side, my right and left get confused. The bullet points there, you will see that Edelman found that people are actually trusting the government to do certain things. They're trusting the government to provide economic relief, get the country back to normal, contain COVID-19, and inform the public. And if you look at the percentages that express trust in asking the government to do these things, you'll notice that while a supermajority are looking to government for information, informing actually falls at the bottom of the priority list when it comes to what people want government to take the lead on. The picture on this slide is from the Riverside County public hearing on reopening a couple weeks ago. And I'm sure those of you from the Riverside area are more aware than I am of this meeting, that it was 11 hours long, had a full 5 hours of public comment, both in person and phone-in comment. Now, part of the reason for that was an information problem. The county had sent some mixed signals. People didn't necessarily know what was going on. They were trying to sort through some very confusing information, which is a lesson for government. How we message matters. But another big part of that is an engagement problem. And it's actually an all too familiar one. So I will be the first to admit, I did not watch all 11 hours of the meeting. I did read the Press Enterprise article on it, however, and their description of how most of the people who were present in the room voiced a pro-return to normal position, while others who were calling in on the phone were really opposed to lifting the orders, and there was kind of this back and forth between one and the other. And this really didn't surprise me because I've seen this before. This isn't a result of social distancing. This isn't the result of having one group in the room and the other group out of the room. It's a result of the way we do public hearings. And if this is public engagement, I just want to really emphasize that it is completely rational for local staff and electeds to not want more of this, right? It's rational to not want to listen to contradictory public testimony for 5 hours. That is not what real engagement looks like. And again, this isn't unique to this time of social distancing. We saw similar public hearings over in Santa Monica when there was the decision about the metro to the sea, with one person standing up and saying, the people of Santa Monica demand that we have this metro to the sea. It will bring us business. It will increase tourism. And other people saying, the people of Santa Monica demand that we not finish this metro. It will bring the homeless out here. The construction will disrupt local business. And you're sitting there being like, well, is this going to help local business or hurt it? It's just the back and forth. There's no real exchange of information in that. But if sustainable policies have to take into account the culture and priorities of the community, unless we find a better way of engaging more diverse cross-sections of the population, our attempts to connect to the community will be at best incomplete and more likely will perpetuate inequities and incompetencies, leading to an erosion of this trust that we're seeing for the first time in a long time. Where does that leave us? Where does that leave us, especially in a time of social distancing? How do you foster genuine engagement? How do you foster genuine engagement online? How do you engage more diverse voices when people's attention is so divided right now, when people are mourning the loss of income, when they're mourning the loss of life, when they're mourning the loss of their graduation, right? This is a challenging time for people. How do you engage more diverse voices when you know that there may be a digital divide in your community? So moving on to the next slide, I think that this is helpful, again, because it clarifies that what we saw is not unique in this time of social distancing. Our traditional processes are dubious at the best of times, and they fail completely in a situation like this. Social distancing certainly makes engagement harder. And on the other side of it, we're going to be trying to do more with fewer staff and less money. So if we measure our success, if our goal as we try to engage our residents is some bar of imaginary situation where 100% of our residents have the opportunity to engage in a meaningful way, it's quite possible that we'll feel defeated before we even get started. So some good news, if you can call it that, is that we don't need to measure ourselves against perfection. Not right now. We should be aiming for perfection, but we can begin by measuring ourselves against what we've already been doing. So the quotes on this slide are majority responses from a survey of local government officials, the top quote, 900 local government officials across the state of California, and 500 leaders of community organizations, also in California, that we did back in 2013, which should tell us all that it's not a new thing for our public meetings to feel frustrating. And I want you to think about a public meeting that you attended pre-COVID-19. All of us have been there, right? You come to City Hall or to the council chambers, or to, even when we have town hall meetings outside City Hall, we often set them up the same way. Lines of chairs, dais at the front, a microphone there for public comment. And one of two things happens. Either 10 people show up, or 100 people show up in matching t-shirts, right? So we see that our typical methods of public engagement, or what we call public engagement, are privileging organized groups. They don't offer that opportunity for response. As I said before, you have one person coming forward and saying one thing, the next person might say something completely contradictory. And instead of those two having a conversation about, like, okay, what's going on here? They just each do their 5 minutes and sit down. Given the fact that most of us, the largest shared fear among human beings is public speaking. So for the vast majority of us, standing up in front of a microphone, especially with our back to the audience, if the microphone's at the front of the room, is a very scary thing. If I have to give public testimony, I'm playing my own script over and over in my head until the moment I have to go up and say something. I say it, and then I sit down and I replay it in my head and wonder if I said everything that I should. I'm not listening to the other people in the room. It's a scary situation for most people. And then, of course, we all know that there are a few people who seem to really enjoy it. So we've created a process that appeals to the few strange people who like public speaking. And again, it doesn't really allow for real deliberation between residents, because deliberation requires people to listen to each other, to voice their solution, but also to engage in answering criticisms, to acknowledge limitations, perhaps to come up with compromises or new creative options. So in a time of non-social distancing, I always recommend having smaller group conversations, people sitting around a table and giving them time to really voice different opinions and wrestle through those. Our typical public meetings lead to what my friend, former Redwood City Manager Ed Everett, calls vending machine government. So this is where residents see themselves as customers, demanding that the government recognize that the customer is always right and provide them with exactly what they as an individual need, which doesn't work in government with limited resources and many, many residents that we're trying to serve. So instead, Ed advocates for processes that help residents to see themselves more as citizens, using that term regardless of immigration status, but a sense of ownership, this sense of responsibility for the challenges that face the community, and a sense of ownership in those solutions. So how do we begin shifting our mindset, as well as those of our residents, from that of customer service provider to that of citizen and partner in solutions? On the next slide, this seems very simple, but it's something that we far too often miss, which is just that we need to be strategic. We need to know our purpose. Far too often we hear management or electeds say, we should go to the public on this, or we need to engage the public, or let's hold a public workshop or a town hall. And so we go and we do the same thing every time. Staff run with it. We don't really take the time to ask the questions about why. What is the purpose of engaging the public? As with the question, what are we trusted or not trusted to do? We need to ask, what do we want to engage the public to do? Now, you can get very detailed in these discussions of purpose, but at a minimum, you should be able to place yourself and your efforts somewhere along a very simple spectrum, which I have on the next slide. And there's more complex versions of this, but I think this is a helpful starting place. You may be trying to inform your public, right? A lot of what we're doing in this crisis mode really is just information. There's not a lot of wiggle room. If we're a city, we may be bound by what the county has decided. We may be bound by what the state has decided. We may be bound by what we're hearing from different public health officials. There might not be a lot of options on the table. It may just be, here's where we're at. Here's the good information. Again, as noted in that Riverside public hearing, this was part of the problem, was the information wasn't clear. So if we know that what we're trying to do is inform the public, we need to think about what's the best way to get the information out there. And we'll get to that in a minute. But especially as we start moving toward reopening, we are going to have more and more issues come up, some of which we've maybe kicked the can a little bit during the crisis mode, but now some of our big issues we need to deal with where we really need to consult the public. There may be really difficult decisions where we have a couple options on the table, and we want to know which of these options best fits with the priorities of our community. So we're giving them preset options. We've created a menu, as it were. And then we're saying which of these is going to be most desirable or least painful moving forward. The process for that is going to look very different than if we're just informing people. And then finally, we can move into situations that are more collaborative, where we're actually inviting people to contribute ideas, to contribute concerns, or to critique ideas, and to start to shape the policies that we're making, and possibly even to take ownership in the final decision. Each of these purposes will lead you to a different process if you're working in person, and quite possibly to a different platform if you're engaging online. And I want to be very clear that it is completely possible, and I think actually often happens, that management, city council, the staff actually running the engagement effort, and the public who come to attend are all thinking that we're somewhere different on the spectrum. We're not in the same place. So if a member of the public comes to something that's really an information session, but it's been described as a public meeting or a public workshop, they may think that they have a greater opportunity for input than they really have, and they will leave frustrated. So if you're having a public information session, call it that. Make it clear, be explicit. First, be strategic internally. Make sure that internally everyone agrees, yes, we know where we are on the spectrum. But then be clear about that to the public. You know, we only have a limited number of options on the table, but we want to know, we can't really do anything but one of these three things, but of these three things, what can we do? Or maybe it really is, here are the options we've come up with, but we can think of other options. Do you have other ideas? Those are going to be two different levels of empowerment. And we need to be clear with what we're asking people to do. So this next slide may be a little bit tricky to read. There's a lot of text, but I will send this after the broadcast. This is a matrix that the Davenport Institute came up with in order to help local governments navigate online engagement. We also have one, and it's a little bit longer, for designing in-person processes. So this matrix really demonstrates that your purpose drives two things. It drives your goal. So for instance, if your purpose is to inform, your goal is to provide clear, usable information. And it also drives your desired conclusion. So in the case of informing, the desired conclusion is that the public knows what's going on. They know how resources are being used. They know what's expected of them. There's knowledge all the way around. Those two things, the goal and the desired outcome, then drive all the other decisions that you make. So if you're informing the public, and again, this is specific to online platforms, you're going to be looking for easy navigation. Can they easily find the information they're looking for? Attractive graphics, using infographics where possible. Is the information downloadable? Is there an existing audience? Are you going to places that people already are? There's accessibility questions that should be raised here. And then we've provided some examples of the types of platforms. And I would say, in my mind, social media is really a tool for informing. I think we get into trouble when we try to use social media for consulting or collaborating. So if as we move down that spectrum, we want to get people off of Facebook or Nextdoor or Twitter, we can use those tools to invite them somewhere else, but there are other platforms that are much better for consulting and collaborating. So if we look at collaboration, so moving to that other end of the spectrum, our goal is to facilitate deliberation, to really have people wrestle with ideas. And our desired conclusion is that the public is establishing the criteria for decision making, They may recommend or co-create solutions. They may be involved in delivering those solutions. They may even be making the final decision. Participatory budgeting would be an example of where the public is actually making the final decision. They may not be, they may be recommending, but they may actually be making it. So if we're doing that, we're asking a lot more of people, and that means that we need more elaborate platforms. So we still need the clearly presented information. Information is the foundation of all of these. But if we're asking people for collaboration, we want users to interact with other users' ideas. We want there to be clear guidelines about what is and isn't on the table. And again, we have some examples of platforms. I know that WRCOG is using Slido, where people can vote up and down on questions. That might be a great opportunity in the consulting or collaborating to get people to interact with each other's ideas. So these don't all have to be a particular platform for these. A lot of times we can use a platform in different ways. Zoom conferencing, for instance, can be used probably for any of these, but you want to know where you're at so that as you're using your platform, you're using it well. Not every engagement is created equal. So I want to share, knowing that in this moment, we're online for now. Most of our stuff is going to be virtual. Maybe we're just beginning to reintroduce some in-person things, but I want to share a few tips for online engagement now that will set us up as we begin to reintroduce in-person engagement. So the first of these is to live stream both meetings and workshops and post recordings of them. One of the advantages that technology has over our in-person processes is that if I can't make it to a public meeting, particularly a more deliberative public meeting, I'm probably out of luck. Maybe we can record it and post it, but I've really missed out on it. Whereas I might even be able to record smaller group deliberations and move between rooms. There's a whole lot that we can do with technology when it comes to live streaming and then posting recordings. Some key considerations when we think about platforms. Again, platforms is not a one-size-fits-all decision. There's going to be different considerations, and some of that's going to be based on your own constraints. Obviously, a huge consideration is cost. And I would note that there's a wide variety of platforms available. There are a number of free options, but often there's some restrictions on that, on time or participants or ability to control privacy. So for instance, I've been using Zoom a lot. I'm guessing a lot of us have used Zoom for meetings. The free version has a 40-minute limit. That's probably not sufficient for any kind of real deliberation. But the highest paid subscription can allow for up to 1,000 participants and up to 24 hours, which hopefully is much longer than we need. That's even longer than the Riverside meeting. We also need to think about connectivity requirements. Some platforms that require higher bandwidth may not run as well in rural areas, especially where internet access relies on cellular or satellite connections. So you'll want to be thinking about that. Again, continue to think about how mobile friendly technology is. As you're recording these, can you integrate it with other platforms? Can you post it as a YouTube video? Can you post it on your city website? Can you share it through social media? And anytime that you're sharing recordings, you should also include information on how people who are viewing those recordings asynchronistically can share comments or feedback with your government. Accessibility is a huge issue. It's a real challenge. Again, this is one of the areas where I would say measure yourself against what you've been doing, not against the perfect standard. It's challenging online because it can be easier to police ADA requirements, for instance. But you can we are often getting further, even in this moment, than we really have in the past. So platforms such as Facebook Live and YouTube include options for closed captioning. It is not perfect. Often after the fact, it's pretty easy to edit them, however. So even if the live moment is imperfect, you can have a staff member. It's much faster to edit an existing closed captioning than it is to, transcribe a lot of conversation. Some platforms even have options for translation. Again, very imperfect. but can be a step forward. And then thinking about how to target things. Where are your residents? Where are your residents online? If you have a younger population that you're trying to reach, Facebook or Twitter might not be the best way to use them. You might think about Snapchat. Again, using those to drive them to other platforms, perhaps. WeChat and WhatsApp. Sorry, totally blanked on it. I have family members overseas, so I use WhatsApp all the time. But WeChat and WhatsApp tend to have a larger amount of use among people who have family overseas, for instance. So if you have an ethnically diverse population of immigrants or of students, you may want to consider some of those platforms as well. During this time, we want to be thinking about how we continue to pursue robust engagement, even during social distancing. How can we integrate high-tech and low-tech options? I would really encourage governments not to forget some of our lower tech options. There are platforms, one of them is Flashvote, which is a survey voting platform that allows people to engage in a variety of ways. You can engage via email, you can engage via the app, or you can engage via SMS. So let's not forget that even if people don't have data, they may have the ability to send a text message, or they may have voice. Let's continue to think about how do we keep our phone lines open. For some residents, including a flyer with a utility bill or sending a postcard with information about how to access city processes might still be the most effective option even today. So we can think about that. Should also be thinking about who is most at risk of being left out. And again, comparing it to our usual processes, being willing to not hit perfection, but to consistently make progress. And as we think about reaching across the digital divide, this is hard. We're not there. I would say I have not yet spoken with a local government that solved this problem, but there are some practices that can help. So one is trying to ensure that our public Wi-Fi access is still available. So even though your community center may be closed or your library may be closed, if those are places that usually have Wi-Fi access, can you leave it turned on so that people can check their email or access a platform or get information sitting in their car in the parking lot? Not ideal, but better than nothing. I know a number of school sites are doing this. They're continuing to have Wi-Fi available so that people can access it from the parking lots or from outside. Coordinating with school districts. This is something school districts have been wrestling with from day one. How do they get technology that is internet connected into the hands of their students? So especially for processes that are related directly to COVID-19, there should be opportunities to coordinate with school districts to figure out how to use some of the strategies that they've come up with to reach those families. And then as always, and this is true for in-person and online processes, we shouldn't be doing this alone. Who are your community partners? What are the non-governmental organizations or the community advocacy organizations or the churches or the mosques, the other congregations in your community that may be struggling to connect with their constituents as well? And how do you partner with them so that you're pulling together and trying to address these challenges as well, so that you're not needing to come up with every creative solution on your own? And then finally, in this moment, really prioritizing community building and information, thinking about what we should be doing and also what we should not be doing. Now, early on, there might have been a number of decisions that could be postponed, and some of those may be ones that really legitimately cannot be postponed anymore. We need to start addressing them. And that's fine, but particularly if some of those are controversial, we need to be even more vigilant than usual to make sure that the public know what we're doing and have the opportunity to engage. Because nothing will kill this moment of trust more than if the public feels like, and unfortunately I know that this has happened, I will not name names of agencies, but there are some agencies who have said, you know what, this has been a really controversial infrastructure project. Sorry, I need another cup of coffee. let's do it right now while no one's looking. By the time everyone's paying attention, we'll be far enough along that the controversy will have died down. I would just caution that that is a very dangerous game. I think people will notice if they feel like a government has taken advantage of this situation to push through something that they know is unpopular. That is long-term going to be cause much more harm than good. So be willing to go the extra mile if something has to be done, and be willing to say, you know what, maybe this isn't the time to move forward with this. Those are hard conversations. Every situation is going to be different. And then remember that engagement is iterative. One of the things that I have loved about this moment is seeing local governments in particular prove that they can be innovative. I think far too often we feel trapped in our own bureaucracy. The private sector can innovate, the nonprofit sector can innovate. We don't innovate. That's just not us. We're too cautious. And yet it turns out that when we need to, we totally can innovate. We've seen local governments that have moved literally from 0 to 100% of employees telecommuting. They've done tremendously creative things with very low-level tools. They've used, Google Documents to coordinate entire work projects. There are certainly more sophisticated tools out there, but we've proven that we can work with what we have. And I would just encourage us to really lean into that, to recognize that engagement is iterative. We're not going to get it right the first time. We're certainly not going to get it all the way right the first time, but trying, experimenting, and then evaluating, how successful were we? Pay attention. Did we get more faces in the door? Maybe there's still groups that we didn't reach, but maybe we're reaching more people than we have before. That's good to know. And then asking who's still not at the table, and then thinking, who are our partners that we can use? What can we change? And really cultivating that into a culture of engagement within your organization, so that someone who tries something really creative, even if it doesn't go well, that what we come to them with is, okay, what did we learn? And what should we do differently next time? But the effort is still celebrated. If we can do that, we will be making tremendous progress in a direction that we needed to be making progress on 5 years ago and have been far too slow to adapt to. But I'm really hoping this moment can be our opportunity to lean into these things. I want to just finish here, and then we'll go to questions with some of the resources that we have available at the Davenport Institute. We have customized trainings and workshops. So if this is something that your agency says, hey, we only have 4 people in our office right now, we are a tiny agency, how do we do this? We can work with you on a customized training, or bring several small agencies together to do that. Those could be in person or virtual, depending on the situation at any given moment. We also have a 3-day professional certificate in public engagement for local government. And I know several WRCOG members have been through that in the past. This year, we will be going virtual with that in the fall. So it's usually a 3-day program. It's going to be a 6-week program, 1 to 2 hour modules, highly interactive, selective, only 15 people in a cohort, so that there's a lot of back and forth and engagement. And it's really going to focus on what does engagement look like right now in this moment. So I encourage you to check that out. We also have a variety of public engagement resources and toolkits that we can provide or adapt. We do limited consulting. We are a team of 2.5 women. So we don't do a lot of consultation because that's fairly heavy lifting, but we do have a network of consultants across the state that we can try to connect you with as well. So with that, I will turn it back over for questions.
Thank you, Ashley, for that very informative presentation. So now we'll be turning over to the Q&A portion of our broadcast. Once again, I want to remind you that there should be a QR code appearing in the corner of your screen. You want to make sure that you take your cell phone and scan that QR code and type in the event code forward, which is FORWARD2, FORWARD2. too. And while we're getting those questions teed up, I want to go ahead and introduce my colleague, Rachel Singer, who is the communications extraordinaire for WRCOG. And you've probably heard her voice on our popular podcast series, the COGcast, which is a bi-weekly 20-minute podcast series featuring the people, places, and organizations working to make a difference in the region. In case you haven't heard our podcast, a banner should be appearing in the corner of the screen now, and you can go ahead and check out our podcast there. We hope that you can hear some of the fun things that we've got going on, and you can learn and listen in on our podcast series overall. And so now, again, you've heard her voice. You get to see her in action, live and moderating the Q&A portion of our webinar. Rachel Singer, turning it over to you.
Well, thank you for the very generous introduction, Elisa. I'm excited for the opportunity to sit down with Ashley and chat a little bit more about her presentation and also ask your questions. As Elisa mentioned, we'll be taking all of our questions from the Slido app, so be sure to submit there. But to start us off, we're going to take a look actually at the polls that we had open throughout the presentation. And so the first poll that we had open was, where along the spectrum is your agency focusing most of your engagement efforts? So Ashley, it looks like the majority of people voted inform. What are your thoughts on these results?
Not particularly surprising, particularly given the moment that we're in. I think at this moment, there's just so much information that's changing rapidly and constantly. I would note, I think one of the interesting things about this is that more people say that they're in collaborating than consulting, which I think is really interesting. Normally, I would expect that informing is almost always the thing that we're going to do the most of. I think a lot of the consulting, and maybe some of its clarity of words, would be more, here are our options, some of the budget games that we do, here's where we're at with budget, where are our priorities would fall into that, and then collaborating. But as local governments, particularly in a moment like this, most of what we're going to be doing is informing, and I'm just really glad that people could peg themselves on that spectrum, right? I think that taking the moment to pause and say, do I know what I'm asking of the public? And in the case of information, it might not be much, but recognizing that if you are asking more of them, that's going to have to look different.
Definitely. And I think that as we move forward too, especially in light of everything happening with COVID-19 currently, I think that we're probably starting to see more of that collaboration piece to what you're saying as we look forward to what it looks like to reopen and things of that nature.
And that's where it's going to become really important, is for those policy solutions. I mean, even when it comes to reopening, right, the situation in every community is going to be different, not just in terms of, obviously more urban, dense areas are going to have a higher risk, but also the culture of the community actually is going to matter, because some people are going to be very cautious and very risk averse. Other people are going to prioritize the togetherness and be willing to take a bit more of a risk to do that. And I think knowing where your community is on that is going to be really important.
Definitely. So taking a look at the second poll, that was more regarding what platforms the different participants have been engaging with their residents. And so what are your thoughts on this? Does it surprise you that Zoom has been the popular choice?
No, I was telling someone that my husband and I have had discussions about how if we just invested in Zoom a year ago, we would be set for retirement now. I think for many people, Zoom is a really good platform for doing a couple of things. One is for being intuitive. For people who aren't particularly familiar with technology, it has a pretty intuitive user interface if you're inviting people to participate. Zoom also has some advantages when it comes to connectivity, as well as Zoom has been very responsive. I think they've seen their moment, and so they've really stepped up and been responsive. I'd be interested to know what the other platforms that people are using are, if people want to put some of those maybe in the question and answer box, just for our own curiosity. I'm always on the lookout for new platforms. I think one of the things that I really hope people take away from this is not that platforms don't matter. Like I said, Zoom has some advantages, but I think that there are other platforms that could be used in different ways, but maybe better for other things. But I think the key is really to know and to plan ahead of time as you're moving into these platforms. I think we can want the platform to do our work for us. So the platform should plan our meeting, and realizing that you're going to need to spend even more time upfront planning how a meeting is going to be delivered and moderated, and questions responded to, integrating something like live YouTube with Slido, for instance, and thinking about how can you mix platforms to really make things work for you is good, but that's work that we have to do. We can't expect the platform to do it for us.
Definitely. And I think that there's a lot more coordination that happens on the front end of organization of who on staff is in charge of what, to really make the user experience per se, or the participants experience, a more streamlined process to hopefully encourage more engagement from them as well. So transitioning more into the Q&A, the first question that I want to highlight is it necessary to show the public how all input received was incorporated or not incorporated in the final product? Whatever happened with public input?
I love this question because it's really something I should have addressed earlier, which is, yes, it's extremely important to close the loop. I would say the all input, you're probably going to have a few of those crazy comments. It's just going to happen, and you can decide how seriously to take those. But certainly if there are comments that you're seeing a lot of energy around, or comments that's like, oh, that would be great, but it's going to be way too expensive. If you can tell someone that, then it's kind of amazing how different it is if I know that you didn't do what I wanted you to do and you tell me why. I mean, I think this is something we all learn in childhood, right? If we ask our parents something and the response is, no, you've spent your allowance already, versus just the no, one feels very arbitrary. And so I think to let people know that they're heard, to remember to close the loop, people are much more accepting of the fact, even that their preferred option wasn't chosen, if you can demonstrate that you really listened to what they wanted and responded to it. And if you're able to show, you asked us to do this for these 5 reasons, we couldn't do that, but here's what we did do that we're hoping will help get to the same, and offer a chance for feedback on that, is great and can really help build that trust.
Definitely. And I think that that's a good segue into another question is, what do you think that it will take for public trust in government to not slip back into skepticism? And we can focus more on local government too.
Yeah, I don't want to take on the federal government right now. That's someone else's problem. I work with local governments for a reason. I do think I think that the engagement, collaboration, being able to work with people so that the solutions that you're coming up with actually match what the community wants and needs. Again, within limits, right? We're all going to be bound by budgets. There are going to be things that we just can't do moving forward, but making sure that we're communicating that people are able to see we're not just sort of choosing our own pet projects. I think that even with certain things, it's amazing how much we can take for granted why something's happening. So for instance, I think of driving around with my father, and there was a road construction project happening that he's like, I don't know why this is happening here. This road is fine. These roads have bigger problems. And I happened to know, because of the type of road it was, that the county had received a grant for certain types of roads and not others. Well, he didn't know that. So even just having those things of like, we're doing this because we have the funding for this that's not coming from our sales tax. We can't do this because we have to pay for it through sales tax, and we don't have that right now. So some of that's an information challenge, but a lot of it is also going to be, again, listening to residents and then closing the loop, so that as they're bringing ideas to the table, we're not just dismissing them or not just doing our own thing, but we're actually listening. I hear people a lot of the time say, well, the public want to feel heard. I think no one wants to feel heard. People want to be heard. And I think we often don't realize, we do a listening session, we let people vent, and we're like, good, they vented. And there is a time and a place for that. But as we're inviting them to be part of creative solutions, we really need to be responding to those creative ideas, inviting them to be partners in that. Too often we kind of, and I mentioned this a little bit in the presentation, but we triangulate between what can we afford, right? We know our resources. Government is really good at thinking about how do we have the human and the monetary fiscal resources to do this or not. We can think in terms of efficacy. You know, is this going to solve the problem? And then we can think in terms of our own jurisdiction. Is this our responsibility or is it someone else's? And I think as policymakers, oftentimes we're triangulating between those three things, and we can come up with an optimal solution. But if that solution doesn't fit with the culture and history, or the cultures and histories of the communities we're working with, it can be a really beautiful solution on paper and completely crash and burn in practice. So I think making sure that we really understand the communities that we're working in, that we're not running up against those, we're not doing something that's countercultural to the place we're working, is going to be really important for maintaining trust.
Definitely. So closing out our Q&A time, that went by so quickly. I wanted to ask one last question. Do you have any examples of where different organizations, whether that be city, nonprofit, COG, County Transportation Commission, MPO, university, private business, we've got lots of examples, where all of them came together and did civic engagement together?
That is a great question. I have a bunch of examples where some of them came together and did business together. And I'm actually just going to share one. This was pre-COVID-19, so this was much more on the ground. We have this as a case study on our website, so you can look at it a little bit more. But we worked with the city of Hayward up in Northern California, who actually did a service learning project with their local community college. They were trying to reach a community that was one of the most linguistically diverse census districts in the country, and had never really been engaged in any kind of visioning or plan. And they worked on the service learning project. So they basically recruited a bunch of the community college students. The professors led it, and it was interesting. It was like English professors and art professors, not poli-sci professors, who led this project. The students went out, they did a ton of interviews. They ended up with an art display that helped tell the story of this community. And then the whole project ended up shifting from what was going to be a community vision to what was actually some tangible help for like microgrants and projects on the ground, because that's what the community needed. So I wish I could talk about that more, but I know we're up against time. So I'd encourage people to look it up on the Davenport Institute website. It was a really cool project.
That sounds awesome. Well, Ashley, we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to invest not only in our region, but also be a guest on the Future Forward broadcast today. For any other questions, I'm sure that people can definitely reach out to you as well. But Absolutely. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Elisa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel and Ashley, and thank you to our viewers out there for tuning in to today's episode. We'll be providing a downloadable link of the presentation to everyone who registered for today's broadcast. Additionally, you should be able to find the PowerPoint and any of the materials associated with this presentation in the description box of the YouTube link down below. And again, we'll also be sending an e-blast out to all of those that have registered for today. And so I want to go ahead and let everyone know as well that because of the platform, our YouTube link platform, you can always go ahead and go back, pause. That's the beauty of using YouTube. So before we sign off, I want to go ahead and let you guys know of the future broadcasts that we have coming up. We have a special virtual broadcast event coming up on Thursday, June 25th from 9:30 to 2:30 p.m. Actually 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. And we will be having a timely we'll be having dynamic discussions on talent, innovation, and place. The theme for that particular broadcast is a region at its tipping point. So talent, innovation, and place, TIP. So we hope that you can join us for that broadcast. Make sure you pay attention to any of the marketing promos that come out. We hope that you can join us then. And we also appreciate you tuning in to today's episode. So until then, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Stay safe and stay healthy. Bye.